class, I just want to give you a little disclaimer before the lesson starts. As I started the lesson, I said that we were going to do tasks 6 through 15. What I meant to say is that we were going to do tasks 6 through 10 just as it's written in the title of this video. Of course, like always, I'm going to provide the notes at the beginning of the video for people who can't watch, don't have the time to watch the entirety of the lesson. But as always, I do suggest that if you find the time to do it, watch the whole lesson, because I don't just tell you the definitions of these procedures, I tell you how they would be implemented in ABA. We're going to start now with tasks 6 through 15. When you're looking at the competency assessment form, don't miss the part where it says in tasks 6 through 15, 3 of them must be demonstrated with a client. If you look all the way to the right of the form, it says assessment type, and you can either do it with a client or role play with the BCBA or BCABA. But you can't do it for all of them for 6 through 15. So, and you don't get to choose which one you're going to do with the client. The person conducting the exam is going to choose which one you're going to do with the client. So you have to know how to do all of them. It says right on top of that form where it says tasks 6 through 15, that's where it says 3 of tasks 6 through 15 must be demonstrated with a client. I just wanted to let you know that so you're not surprised when you take your exam. Okay, so starting with task 6, which is discrete trial training, or DTT. Now, when they're doing the exam, discrete trial training, they might ask you, what is DTT? Or they might ask, I think they more than likely ask you what is DTT, and you would have to say discrete trial training. I don't think they would ask you to abbreviate discrete trial training, because, I mean, well, here it says discrete trial teaching. The way I learned it is discrete trial training. It's the same thing, right? So, and that's funny, I wrote it here as teaching. So, discrete trial teaching or discrete trial training, they'll accept either way. If they ask you what is DTT and you say training, and it's teaching, they're gonna accept that. They're not gonna mark it wrong because that's what you said. So they don't want you to know, when they say what is DTT, they don't want you to only say discrete trial teaching. They want you to give an example. So when you're doing discrete trial teaching, the most important thing to know, and I'll underline this here, the most important thing to know is that DTT is RBT led. So it's led by you as the RBT. The teaching is led or directed by or initiated by the RBT. So I'll write it a little bit better here. The teaching is initiated by the RBT. DTT commonly takes place at the table. I couldn't imagine. Yeah, it doesn't only have to take place at the table. You can do it really anywhere else. But I mean, if they say where would it take place, you're gonna say it more often takes place at a table. Now, you as the RBT have to condition table time to be fun. Because if you're only ever teaching at the table, if you're only ever doing DTT at the table, your learner is going to find the table very aversive at some point, unless they really enjoy learning, right? You might find a learner who actually really likes learning. But if the only thing you're doing is working at the table may become something aversive to the child, because they know every time they sit at the table, they're gonna have to work. So make, this is just a little nugget for you. Make the table a fun place for your learner. So that when you want to make the table a fun place for your learner, so that when you do discrete trial teaching, they're not gonna give you a hard time. They may just naturally not give you a hard time. They may not. They may not mind the table, but there are some kids who they don't want to work at the table. They don't want to go to the table because they know they have to work, and it's not fun for them. So when you reinforce your learner, you can keep them at the table. Sometimes they may want to get up. I think more often than not, most of the learners I had, they didn't want to be reinforced by doing something at the table. Usually they wanted to get up and play imaginary play or do something getting up. But you can, if your learner, you know your learner likes playing with Play-Doh, right? That's reinforcing for them. Or your learner likes coloring, or your learner likes slime. Those are all things you can do at the table. So when you are pairing with them, right? When you're building rapport with your learner, you can do that at the table. So that when you start doing this, and let me highlight it now, when you start doing this, it's not going to be that big of an issue because they know this isn't the only thing we do at the table. And you can, I mean, if I were a learner and I just sat at the table for, depending on how old the learner is, I just sat at the table for 7 to 10 minutes doing DTT, I'm probably not going to want to be reinforced at the table, which is why most learners want to get up after DTT time, because they just spent 7 to 10 minutes sitting down and they probably don't want to do that anymore, which is fine. I'm just saying for other times when you're reinforcing them, you can do it at the table with them. The table doesn't have to exclusively be a place for learning. Some examples for discrete trial training or discrete trial teaching. What does it look like? Well, you may work on something called visual perception skills, right? Or match to sample. So for visual perception skills, this is just one example of discrete trial training, right? Or discrete trial teaching. Let's say your learner needs to match shapes into a shape sorter. So you need to give them an array of shapes. I mean, depending on where they are, maybe you'll give them 3 or 5, or maybe just one at a time. And they need to put that shape into a shape sorter. What is a shape sorter? It's like that toy that's like a container, and then it has a lid on top of it, and it has holes in the shape of a star, in the shape of a square, triangle, whatever. So you may either give them, depending on their baseline, you may give them 3 to choose from, or 5, or just 1. And you're gonna tell them, you're gonna give them a very simple SD, right? Put in, and that would be DCT, right? You're doing that at the table. You're teaching them how to, it's a program that you're running at the table, and you're training them or teaching them how to sort shapes into a shape sorter. So that would be one example of discrete trial training or teaching and how you would do it. That's just one thing. I mean, match to sample, you may have different colors. Let's say you cut out pieces of, or you have like 3 crayons, right? An array of 3 crayons. And then you have red, blue, and green. And then you give them other red, blue, and green crayons, the same exact crayons. And then you're going to give it to them one at a time. You're going to give them the red crayon, and you're going to say match, and then they have to take the crayon and put it put it next to or on top of the other red crayon that's in the array. So that's all discrete trial teaching. I hope that makes sense and that you understood that. It's when you're learning ABA through a YouTube video and you're watching people do it, it's much harder to learn this way than it is when you're actually on the job, because once you're on the job and then you're doing it, it becomes a lot less complicated, and you kind of see, oh, this isn't really that hard. So now we have, and let me do a little red star here on top of this. And I want to do this here. Now we have naturalistic teaching. So for naturalistic teaching, whoever's conducting the competency assessment, they might ask you, what is NET? And they might not say naturalistic teaching. They might tell you, it's the same thing like with DTT. They might say, what is NET? And you would say natural environment teaching, right? Because that's how we learn it. That's how I learned it. So if they ask you, what is NET? You're going to say natural environment teaching. And natural environment teaching is learning that is initiated by the child, really by the child's interests, right? Because they're not gonna say, teach me this, and interest, I think that's how you spell it, interest. I'm sorry if I spelled that wrong, interest, I'm sorry. Terrible speller. I'll double check, make sure I spelled that right. Okay, I did spell it right. Okay, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So, learning that is initiated by the child's interest. Because the children and your learners, they're not going to say, teach me this, right? They're never going to do that. So when I say learning that is initiated by the child's interests, I mean the child you may be reinforcing the child, and they might be looking at toys and or engaging with toys or whatever, or playing with a doll. And as they're playing with the doll, well, maybe they're reaching for something, right? Maybe they want the doll and they're pointing to it, and they may know how to speak. There are some children with autism who know how to speak and then just don't. So they may know how to speak, and you need to, that one of your goals as an RBT is to increase expressive language. So let's say you're reinforcing the child, they're picking a toy and they point to the doll, and you would ask them, what do you want? And then they might say doll. And if they don't say doll, then you would prompt them, and we're gonna get into prompting in a little bit. And so you just gave them the doll. And then you would give them the doll, right? If they say doll, you would give it to them. So you're teaching them as they're in their natural environment. So as they're playing, you're teaching them. Because I think that's a child's work is play. You know, that's the best way to teach a child is through play. I'm not saying that naturalistic teaching is the only way people should implement behavioral analysis, apply behavioral analysis, but I do think that teaching children as they're playing, I do think that that is a really great way to teach children. So another example, it could be even very like, you could teach them in a way that they don't even realize that they're learning, right? So let's say that they really like action figures and they're playing with action figures, and that's what they want to play with, and you grab a superhero, right? Maybe one they haven't seen before, and you grab them and you're like, oh, here's Captain America and he's gonna leap into the sky. And then so you grab you're creating this whole scene, and then you grab Captain America and then he leaps into the sky. And they may not know that expression, leap into the sky. They may just know maybe flying. But because you said leap into the sky and then you do it with the action figure, well, now you're teaching them what leap into the sky is, because one, you're playing with them. Here comes Captain America, he's gonna leap into the sky, right? And then you do it. Well, now they just learned what leap into the sky is because you just did it with them. Rather than sitting at the table and telling them, leap into the sky, this is leap into the sky. Well, actually, they just learned it through playing, right? Assuming that this child has receptive skills, and they understand well, it wouldn't be receptive. They can, yeah, that has nothing to do with receptive skills, but, they leap into the sky, and then he leaps into the sky and he's gonna do a cartwheel, and then you show him what a cartwheel is, and then you're basically, what you're doing there in natural environment teaching, what you would really want to do is something called linguistic mapping. This is what you do. This is how you do, I would say, natural environment teaching. I think this is the best way to do natural environment teaching, is through something called linguistic mapping, which you don't need to know what this is called as an RBT. You learn this when you're studying behavioral analysis at a master's level. But linguistic mapping is describing, no, not describe, well, yeah, you are describing, but basically commenting on everything that's happening. On everything that's happening and everything you're doing. And everything you're doing as you play with them. So this is a little definition here. This is a really good way to do. So if someone said, how would you do NET, how would you implement natural environment teaching? You could say, oh, through linguistic mapping, right? That would be a way to teach children naturally. It's just commentary. And you can also do this through, let's say that something that's really reinforcing for them is a tablet, which you're probably gonna find a lot in kids with autism. They love their tablets. I mean, not all of them. I actually had a couple learners who they weren't interested in the tablet. I mean, they liked some things about it, but they actually preferred playing with actual toys, which I loved about them. And that, like, playing with actual toys was more reinforcing for them. But let's say that what the most reinforcing thing for your learner is a tablet. You can do linguistic mapping as they're on their tablet, because maybe they're watching a video and then you're watching it with them, and you're not just gonna sit there and watch it with them quietly. You're gonna comment on everything you're seeing, and you're gonna make the video actually more exciting for them, if that makes sense. So that's how you would do naturalistic teaching. That's what naturalistic teaching is. So you're gonna go where your learner goes. You're gonna follow them, see what they're interested, see what they want, and just go with it, and then teach them as they're doing what they like to do in a very fun and natural way. Okay, so now let's move on to chaining. We have chaining. I don't like that there's nothing here. It's gonna, there we go. Chaining. So there is, if I remember correctly, there's 3 different types of chaining. So I'll write it here. 3 different types of chaining. And oops, oh my goodness, I know how to spell chaining. That was just an accident. Chaining is, and you know, if we look at, it's skill acquisition, right? And that's what we're doing. We're doing skill acquisition. This is a skill acquisition procedure. This is a way that you're gonna teach a child how to do something. So 3 different types of chaining. There's backwards. I'll just write them here and then I'll tell you what they are. There's backward, forward, and then I believe the third one is total, I want to say total task, but I confuse total task with something else. I'm gonna look it up really quickly because yeah, it is total task, because there's total task and then there's something else that sounds like total task, but it's not. So, but yeah, I was right. And then there's total task. Hi class, I had to cut the video here, the lesson here, because I realized as I was editing the video that I didn't explain chaining properly, and I just messed up as I was teaching. It's easy to confuse forward and backward chaining. The terms are, they're sort of the inverse of one another, so it can get a little bit tricky, but I'm gonna explain now and hopefully you'll understand. Forward chaining is when the learner knows how to do the first steps, and then you're gonna prompt them for every step afterward. So when the learner is engaging in a task, forward chaining is when the learner does the first steps of a task and then you prompt them to finish the task. Backward chaining is when you are prompting the first steps and then you let them do the last step independently. For example, hand washing. For forward chaining, the learner is going to turn on the water independently, and then you're gonna prompt them through every single step afterward. Backward chaining is when, let's continue using that washing hands example, is when you turn on the water, you're prompting them the whole way through, and then you teach them to dry their hands at the end. And as you're doing this chaining, you're going to fade out the last steps first for backward chaining, right? So for backward chaining, now I'm kind of going into fading out here. For backward chaining, you are doing the first steps first, and they're doing the last step, right? So the last step would be drying their hands. Once they've mastered drying their hands, what are you gonna teach them afterward? You're gonna keep prompting them through the first steps, and then you're gonna leave the water on, and they have to turn off the water on their own. And you're gonna keep letting them do that independently until they've mastered that. And so you're doing it backwards, right? You're not teaching them first turn on the water, then, first turn on the water, then get soap, all of that. So that would be you're teaching them in order, in the sequential order. Backward chaining is when you're teaching them backwards. So you're letting them learn the last steps first, and you're fading out all the way until until they master the first step. Forward chaining is when they know how to do the first steps, like washing hands. They know how to turn on the water, grab soap, and then you're gonna teach them to scrub and all of that. And then eventually after, right, let's say they turn on the water, get soap. Once they've mastered scrubbing, then for your next session or the next time you do it, you're going to let them turn on the water, grab soap, scrub their hands, and then you're gonna prompt them for their next thing, which is, rinsing their hands, it could be. And then, once they've mastered rinsing, then when you start again with the chain, you're going to do, they turn on the water, they get soap, they scrub their hands, they rinse their hands because they've mastered all those things, and then you're gonna prompt them to dry their hands. So that's the difference between backward and forward, and hopefully that's not too confusing for you. Total task, super easy, but it's like never used in ABA. Total task chaining is when you teach all the steps all at once. That doesn't really ever happen because what we mostly do in ABA is shaping, right? And I'm going to talk about shaping next, but just so that you know, if they want an example, if whoever's conducting this exam wants an example of total task, it's mostly a procedure that's used in neurotypical classrooms, I would say. So for example, in a math classroom, your math teacher wants to teach you the quadratic equation or the quadratic formula. They're not just going to show you the formula, right? They're going to show you the formula, and then they're going to show you how to do it, and then they want you to do it. So they're going to show you the formula, and then they're going to model it for you, they're going to do it for you, and then they're going to, they're going to give you an example, and then they expect you to do it, right? That would probably be your classwork, to work on doing it. So they taught you every single step, and you have to do every single step. I never did that in ABA, and maybe you'll do it, I don't know. I never did it in the 2 years I was in RBT. What we mostly did was shaping, and I'm going to talk about that now. Okay, so those would be the 3 forms of chaining. Now we have shaping. I love shaping. We do it a lot. Shaping. Okay. So here we have shaping. Shaping, some people explain this in a really complicated way, and it's really not that complicated. Shaping is when shaping is teaching shaping is taking approximations of behavior to teach a novel behavior. And that's a very technical term here, novel. That just means new behavior. So what do I mean by, this might be where people get confused. Approximations. What do I mean by approximations of, maybe I'll just do this. What do I mean by approximations of behavior? Because whoever's conducting the assessment is gonna ask, because you can define it for them, what is shaping, and you can memorize this and tell them, and they're gonna be like, okay, what is that? What's an approximation of a behavior, whatever, and they're gonna wanna know, again, how you would implement that. And the way you would do that, or what, okay, an approximation of a behavior is a small form of a behavior. So it's a part of a behavior. That's what it is. So I'll write that down for you. And I'll put a little star. Approximation of behavior is a part of a behavior. You're gonna use shaping for a lot of things. At least I did in ABA, right? We used it all the time. And you might most commonly use it or accept it when you're trying to increase expressive language in a child. So you might have a child who has a speech impediment or is learning how to speak. So if you want to hear them, so if you want them to say the word book, right? That's one of the words that they have to say. That's one of the words you're teaching them is book. The correct way to do that, that would be a coex, right? Say book, right? Or you would just say book, right? Say book, right? So if you want them to give you a part of that, because speaking is a behavior, so if you want them to give you a part of that word, you're not going to give them part of the word. You're not going to say part of the word book. You're not going to say buh, right? You're not going to make that sound for them. You're going to give them the whole word. Every single time. You're gonna tell them, say book, right? And if it's a larger word, if it has 2 syllables or 3, like let's say butterfly. If you want them to say butterfly, you would break it down. You would say butterfly, and you're always gonna give them the whole word. You're not going to give the approximation of the behavior, right? It says here, it's taking approximations of behavior to teach a novel behavior. So if you hear, let's say you're the RBT, and you hear that your learner is making more G sounds, but in your behavior support program, you have a lot of words that start with B and D or whatever, you can always go to whomever's on the case, either the like whichever behavioral analyst, right? You're gonna go to them and you're gonna say, I hear them saying a lot of, like, making a lot of G sounds. Can we give them words that start with G? Like, say good, say, you know, and it would be, or it's not good, that's kind of hard. So say go, right? So maybe you can recommend that and say, oh, I've observed that they're making a lot of G sounds. Maybe we could put the word go, right? And so the approximation is the G sounds that you're hearing. And so let me backtrack and say, if you're trying to teach your learner how to say the word book, you're always going to say the full word, and you're going to say it very clearly, and you're going to enunciate it in a very exaggerated way so that they can hear it very clearly. And you might say book, and then the child might respond in a way that's like buh. So if you see that they formed with their lips the B sound, or they formed with their lips that B, and sound came out and they said buh, you're going to reinforce that. That's shaping, right? Okay, they didn't say the whole word. They didn't say book. But what did they do? They gave you an approximation. They gave you part of that word. So you're going to reinforce that. And when you reinforce them saying part of that word, they're going to be motivated to say more of the word. And that's why we do shaping, right? We don't always, and it depends on your learner, because if you know your learner can say book and you're still working on it, like, for how long are you going to accept that approximation? And that's really up for the behavioral analyst to decide, right? Because your behavioral analyst might say, yeah, they give you the approximation, but I know that they can say that word. So you're not going to reinforce that. You're not going to accept that approximation because they've said the word before, and what I want is for them to say the word. And that you're going to reinforce it when they say the word. So it depends, right? It depends on what the behavior analyst wants, and you would ask them, right? Can I accept an approximation? And can I reinforce an approximation? It would just depend. You know, the behavioral analyst is the one who's done the assessment on the child, and when you're new to the case or whatever, you might reinforce an approximation, and your behavior analyst might tell you, don't reinforce that. They know how to say the whole word. Like, don't accept that. But if it's a learner who struggles to speak, you're gonna reinforce anything close. You're gonna take anything close to what you're trying to teach them. If they get a little bit close to what you're trying to teach them, you're gonna reinforce that. And that's shaping, right? That's what that would be. Another shaping, so another way you would shape something is letters. Let's say your learner doesn't know the whole alphabet, right? They don't know the alphabet. Are you gonna teach them every single letter all at once? No. You're gonna take like 3 letters or 4 or 5, and you're gonna teach them 4 to 5 letters, right? Through discrete child teaching. That's how you would do it. You could also do it in a naturalistic way, but I think a more productive way to teach the alphabet is through discrete child teaching. So you're not gonna show them 20 letters or 15 letters. You're gonna show them like 3 letters, and that's also part of shaping. You're gonna take a little bit. It's kind of like breaking down complex behaviors. That's part of it. Actually, in a formal, not that you need to know this, I don't want to confuse you. In informal teaching, not therapeutic teaching, that would be like scaffolding. So shaping is if you are a teacher and you are moving toward becoming an RBT, you can kind of think of shaping like scaffolding. Where scaffolding is, you know, breaking down complex behaviors to teach a new behavior. And shaping is really when you accept parts of a behavior that you're trying to teach, or when you teach it when you break it down to teach it in a more simpler, in a simpler way. So shaping, super important. All right, did I highlight? Yeah, I did. Okay, discrimination training, and then I'm gonna pause here after this because it's been a little bit. I'll pause. There's gonna be a take a break slide, and then we'll come back. What is discrimination? As I'm writing this, think to yourself, what is discrimination? Alright, so you probably thought of it, you may have thought of it in a social way. Discrimination is when somebody discriminates against me. But, and that's part of it, but that's not what it is in ABA. So discrimination is, can this child discriminate between letters? Can they tell two things apart? Can they tell the difference between a circle and a square? Can they tell the difference between letter D and letter B, right? So discrimination is really, can the learner tell the difference between things? And it's usually going to be shapes, colors, numbers. And think about it, you know, if you're a mom or you're a dad, when you are teaching your child letters and numbers, and you know, often we teach our children letters and numbers at the same time, don't they often have a hard time discriminating between 5 and S and B and D, right? That's probably the most common thing. Don't they have sometimes a hard time discriminating between a square and a rectangle? Sometimes, right? So that would be discriminating. Can they tell the difference between something like this, between things like that? That's discrimination training. It's very simple. And we're gonna stop there on a, let me highlight this. We're gonna stop there on a very simple note. This isn't very hard to know. This would be an example. I really think, I don't even think, I mean, they might, I don't know who's gonna do your exam. I mean, who's gonna conduct your exam. But they may just want to know the definition, because this is pretty straightforward. Can the learner tell the difference between things? It's a very straightforward thing. They may not ask for an example the same way when we did measurement and we were doing measurement. The same way they're probably not going to ask you for an example of frequency or duration. They kind of just want you to know what it is. That's sort of what discrimination training, they probably just want you to know what it is. I don't think you would need to provide an example of discrimination training. So I'm going to stop here. There's going to be a take a break slide, and then we're going to come back. Hey class, discrimination training is going to conclude today's video. I got a little bit ahead of myself and I forgot that discrimination training was task 10. If you'd like to keep studying and you want to learn about tasks 11 through 15, I've already submitted that lesson and you can go ahead and watch it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.